Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my mid-month, January 16th, 2024 AM reading check-in update. I'm later than I hope to be, but more or less in keeping with when I usually start AM reading updates every month. I also am sitting here trying to outrun the sun streaming into this window, which should be happening sooner than I'd like. I haven't also outrun the construction noise outside. But I am excited to have things to talk about. I'm excited that I have my December literary newsletter up and running, which I'll link down below. In my literary newsletters, I capture the literary stories that caught my fancy. I have snippets of Goodreads reviews of the books I read that month. I have a favorite book quote, book pick, etc. So look down there for any and all things about the end of 2024 because I'm now on to 2025. And I do always start these AM reading videos by dissecting a short story in a literary magazine, and I'm currently working through one, but in fact I thought I'd put it aside for January because also in January I have the tradition of reading the best American short stories, which this year, well 2024, was guest edited by Lauren Groff, and I'm really loving, these new designs. They're really pretty. I also found out, although I might have known this and then it just, glossed off me or something, that this will be Heidi Pitlour's last year as series editor. It really shocked me as I was reading her intro, although I kind of picked up on it immediately because she was doing this big retrospective on all the other series editors. But it made me feel a bit verklempt and nostalgic because, I've been reviewing these Bass editions for several years. I've been reviewing them on Goodreads since 2011, and she's been the series editor since then. And I actually have, I think, physical copies of 2009 and 2010 on my shelves right there, and she was series editors for those as well. And I know she was series editor, well, for a long time. I don't think she was when I was in college, and I probably did read through some of those for class, but certainly ever since I've been taking Bass seriously, she has been the series editor, so I am certainly wondering what's going to be different next year. But presumably the series will go on as it has since before she started. And anyway, Lauren Groff is the guest editor of this edition, and I've just started reading through the short stories she has, personally plucked out. And she, I think, promised, a variety of different styles of genres. And she started with something that, leans into surrealism and fairy tales. And in fact, it was actually published first in Fairy Tale Review, and it's called The Magic Bangle by Shastri Akella. And this definitely isn't usually the type of story that is for me. I like more straightforward, realistic stories. I think there was a lot of beautiful language in this story, and it viscerally evoked celebrating Holi and Hyderabad, and that's where the main character meets a man. It's a gay relationship, and there's, magic bangles, there's gin, so it's definitely something, a little otherworldly about this, and it's a little romantic, I guess. It's something that's very fleeting, and the author actually talked in the contributor section about how, he was visiting his mother in Hyderabad and was subject to a homophobic attack on a bus, and that's, I think, what inspired him to write this story, sort of, a Hyderabad where he could more be himself. So, I mean, I appreciate the sentiment, at least. Next, the first book I finished is Anna Turns by Lisa Gornick. I was pretty excited to read this one because this is my first year participating in, Kayla from Books and Lala's Buzzwordathon challenge. She did a cover challenge for 2025, and I decided to utilize it for my, large Raid the Shelves book haul that I did back in in September, I had this large haul of like 18 books that I got from the Jewish Book Council opening its doors up to, all of the bibliophiles. And I was like, oh gosh, what am I going to do with them? I should, justify reading them and so forth. So I fit them all into the Buzzwordathon prompts for this year. And so like it kind of gives that special anticipation, like this, book is part of a new reading series for me, so it better be good. And I thought it was pretty good, this book. It was better than I was anticipating. I was a little worried when reading the jacket copy that, it was going to be a little bit yuppie and pretentious and that I wouldn't like the main character, but actually I thought that her concerns were relatively sympathetic. This is also a Mrs. Dalloway pastiche, which is cool too, and it takes place all within one day. Stream of consciousness. It's the main character Anna's birthday. She's 60. It's nice to get sort of a perspective of an older woman who still has her mother breathing down her back, and that was actually the thing I didn't like about the story as much as the mother, who must have been in her 80s, was just she was the insufferable character. And I felt like, she got a little too much grace that was undeserved in this story, and it was a frustrating ending in that way. But in this stream of consciousness style, we do see, I was about to say Clarissa, but Anna, like, go through, she's at some sort of odds with her husband, who had a back injury almost a decade ago and is on medical marijuana, and they're not intimate anymore. And I thought that was portrayed both her, response and then his reality. It was very moving. She does have a lover as well, and we get into, him and his wife too. And that actually was where the Jewish, the very kind of scant Jewish representation in this came in, especially through his wife. And this weird connection between the wife of her lover and Anna, in that Anna's grandfather was a hotelier in Europe who refused service to the other woman's grandfather, who was a Jew in World War II. And so I don't know. I feel like that's the sort of conceit that worked because we're in a stream of consciousness story, but I didn't necessarily feel like the Jewish content in this was the most intriguing part. I think the most intriguing part was another thing Anna was dealing with, was her child was undergoing, came out as transgender and was starting to undergo treatment for that. And her response to that, I thought was really nuanced and believable. So I really liked that part as well. I liked the disability, how she dealt with that, and how dealing with the transgender issues. So I feel like I'm kind of falling out of love with stream of consciousness writing in general. Like, we're flitting around a lot, too many characters, too few pages. But the writing was strong, and I do feel like there was a lot of, moving character work in here. The next book I finished was Bury What We Cannot Take by Kristin Chen. This is part of my top of the Goodreads resolution that, every year I try to skim the top of my Goodreads TBR. And this one I really liked the history. I liked the idea behind it. I thought in a lot of parts the characters could use some work. But anyway, this takes place during Maoist China in the late 1950s. And we're following this family that, used to be wealthy and actually still lives in a villa and has a couple of servants. But the party is really starting to crack down, and in the beginning of the story, the grandmother of the family takes a hammer to a portrait of Chairman Mao, upset with, changes the party has wrought and, making life much more difficult for them. It comes at a really inopportune time because the grandmother's son had already escaped to Hong Kong, and he has the means now to send for the rest of the family, and they have this sort of guise that he's pretending to be sick, and they're, leaning on clemency that we can say goodbye to him and we'll come back, that sort of thing. But the young son, Liam, of the family is, becoming, indoctrinated within Maoist beliefs, wants to join the party. So what he does is he reports his grandmother And so what happens is that only a small part of, or only out of four of the family members are allowed to get exit permits, in a bid to say the family will come back. So they're forced to leave the youngest member, like 8-year-old Sansan, behind, under the false promise that, she can follow within a few days. And that doesn't end up happening. And a lot of the story is about Sansan's sort of daring, I guess, several weeks to months, living on her own, first with the servants in her home, but then it turns out some family friends are trying to escape China as well, and they try to take her with them. And she's on the road. She's taking a bathroom break when the revolutionaries, the Maoists, come upon them and arrest everyone else. And in fact, her friends are executed. And from this point, Sansan is on the run alone, and so it turns into a story that's really, fraught and compelling to follow, although you kind of start to question how much an 8-year-old, especially someone who had a relatively pampered life in a way. I mean, there were, increasing, hardships placed on her and her family, but they still lived, with decent shelter and food. And anyway, now Sansan is on her own, basically being a street urchin, and she's waiting for the ship to come that was going to go to Hong Kong, and how is she going to get on it and join her family there. So, it's in that, tense way, it's fun to follow, but it's sort of questionable how much is actually, believable. What I like the most is, that it, casts a, critical eye on the realities of, the totalitarian dictatorship, the crackdowns, the, cruelties of the Maoist regime. But I feel like a different story might have been better for that. It's funny, I do think the smaller subplots, if she had fleshed them out more, were more compelling. What was happening in Hong Kong with Sansan's mother's desperate attempts to get Sansan out. The father, meanwhile, is actually having an affair and is basically divorced from the family. And so I guess there's, some interest, and is also dealing with debt. And so there's some just interesting realities happening in his life. He's not a very sympathetic character, but he could be kind of realistic. And then the son also would be a really interesting political character to follow, because he has been indoctrinated, and now he's in Hong Kong, which is not under Maoist control. And the subplot he's going through is that, in school he's found, his other, far leftist sympathizer students, and they're secretly planning to go back to the fatherland. And these stories are just so underdeveloped because Sansan is taking center stage. And I felt like within this particular narrative and this family, they had the more potential for something more believable, perhaps, and more interesting to say about the realities of the time. So I ended the book wishing she'd kind of, taken Sansan out entirely, maybe, and just focused on, the grandmother, and who's, trying to chum it up with other refugees her own age, and the grandson who, has been indoctrinated, and also his family now knows that he's the one who, reported them. And so there's a lot of tension there that you could go into, and, what the two parents are going through. Well, we'd have to give something else to the mother, maybe, if Sansan wasn't there. But anyway, I just felt like, there's a lot of good potential in here, going through the realities of what the Maoist regime would force on a Chinese family during the 1950s. I mean, that's just compelling on its own, but I just think that she didn't tell the most realistic story. And finally, I've now started Happiness by Aminatta Forna, which I picked for my page 112 tag for January. So I'll link that video down below, where I also talk about my Buzzwordathon challenge. And I'm excited to get to this one. It, once upon a time, made it up high in the BookTube prize, and ever since I've been pretty curious to read it. So I'm excited. I picked it up last year during Indie Bookstore Day. I found it at Second Story Books, a used bookstore in DC, which I'll link down below in case you're in the DC area. You might want to check them out. I'm only in early days of this book, so I've seen the fox that weaves the stories together, and I've met Attila, who I met on the page 112 page most prominently. He was on that page, and I see that he is in London for a conference, a human rights conference. He's gone to the theater, and we haven't gotten too far into him beyond that. And then we've met Jean, who is his companion. They've met by chance, running into each other at the beginning of this story. Jean is an American who has lived in London for about a year. And, by page 112, I assume they'll know each other because they're having lunch together. So this also is a story that, in a way, I wonder is going to be stream of consciousness. We're going to follow the fox. These two characters who randomly ran into each other are going to actually have a relationship. But I'm hopeful. Maybe this will be more my speed. It's, not flitting around to too many other characters yet. We're just, staying with developing the characters of these two people. The writing is, engaging so far, so I will report back. And that about covers it for me now. Miraculously, I don't think I was interrupted by much construction noise outside, and I don't think the, sun is streaming in on this video, so that's a relief that my quality of video isn't, too far afield. And I should be back on this channel within the next few days. I am reverting back to some, 2024 retrospection. I've picked out throughout the year and put on my literary newsletter some favorite quotes every month, and so I thought I would go into them with a little more detail into 12 quotes from 12 books of 2024, so stay tuned for that. The world otherwise, we're in a state of chaos. It feels like that's not necessarily new, although some of the specifics feel new. I certainly have my heart with everyone over in Los Angeles and in California right now with the specificity of these horrendous fires that have, destroyed so much and have, unhoused so many people, and so just hoping for the best, that everyone can remain safe and we can work on rebuilding. And in that vein, for the first time in 15 months, it seems like maybe an end of this ultra-violence of the Israel-Hamas war will be at an end, that we'll see the hostages returned, which my own community has been so affected by, the hostages. It's so overwhelming to think of everyone coming home, alive or dead, and, hopefully getting in some desperately needed aid to the Palestinians, and hopefully past that, maybe, we could get to some sort of better future, which it's always hard to think about that actually coming together over there, but I hope that it's just better than what we've been living with for so long. So yeah, just for me and my part, I'm sending out my empathy toward everyone who wants to live together in peace. And so, yeah, that's where I am right now. Hope you're all in a good place too. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.